The story begins in a small town where life seems to flow calmly and serenely. In the center of town is an old pharmacy, a place where locals come for medicine, advice, and human companionship. However, behind the familiar atmosphere of medical care and trust lurks a shadow of prejudice. This pharmacy is staffed by a man whose views and beliefs make him not just a pharmacist, but the keeper of hostility for some customers. The pharmacist is a middle-aged man, always scowling, with a hard stare with which he used to greet those he considered unworthy by his internal unchecked code. Rumors of his rejection and racist views circulated among some families, but most people tried to ignore it. For one family, however, the visit was fatal. One ordinary day, a black girl, 12-year-old Maya, walked into a pharmacy. She was not childishly focused. Her mother had sent her to get medicine, believing it would be a quick and safe visit. The pharmacy was nearly empty except for the girl herself and the pharmacist behind the counter. The cold light coming from the lamps created shadows on the shelves, and the smell of antiseptic made the atmosphere even more alienating. As soon as the girl approached the counter, the pharmacist felt a growing excitement, but it wasn't because she needed help. He looked at Maya as if her presence offended him. She hesitantly said the name of the medicine, and noticing the reluctant expression on the pharmacist's face, she felt that she was being treated differently than she was used to in other places. Instead of friendly help, she was met with a scornful look, and the pharmacist's words sounded cold and alienating. Maya discreetly held out the sheet with the name of the medicine, trying not to meet the pharmacist's eyes. She had been raised to respect all people, and she expected that respect to be mutual. But it was clear to her from the first glance at the pharmacist that she wasn't being greeted with the same openness in this place. The pharmacist didn't even bother to look at the paper. He glanced at Maya and asked with undisguised contempt, "Do you really need this? Where are your parents? Do they really think I'm going to sell my medicine to just anyone?" The girl tried to explain that her mother was waiting for her at home, that she was just running an errand. But there was so much disgust in his gaze that every answer she gave seemed to irritate him even more. He interrupted her halfway through, adding that people like her were not entitled to medication at all. "Can't you understand?" he grumbled, a sarcastic expression on his face. "This isn't a place where you just walk in as you please. I don't have to sell you anything, and I don't care what's going on with your mom." Maya felt shame and confusion overwhelm her. Her cheeks flamed, but not with anger, but with humiliation, which she experienced for the first time with such force. The girl didn't understand what she could have done wrong, why she was being asked to leave, why she was being treated as if she had done something terrible by her mere presence. Her voice trembled as she tried to ask for help again, but the pharmacist only grinned contemptuously. "Go tell your people," he continued, averting his eyes, "that I don't want customers like that. You think you can just come in here and demand something you're not supposed to? Get out of here and hurry up." Maya struggled to hold back her tears, her small hands shaking as she clutched the sheet with the name of the medicine to her chest. The girl looked back at the door as if it were her only way out of this cold, hostile space, but she needed the medicine, and she had to stand and endure. She timidly asked for help again, hoping his heart would soften just a little, but the pharmacist only grinned, leaning over the counter so that his face was close to hers. "Don't you get it the first time?" he hissed. "You don't belong here, and I don't want people like you here. I'll give you the cure, not because you deserve it, but because you won't leave." He reluctantly took the required medicine from the shelf, and even as he held out the package to her, his gaze was full of contempt and aggression. The girl, humiliated to the core, felt utterly helpless. She took the pills and mumbled something like, "Thank you," but he only grinned as if her words were nothing to him. With a cold, indifferent expression, the pharmacist handed Maya a packet of pills, which she held carefully, as if afraid of burning herself. He knew very well that this medicine required a doctor's prescription and that it could cause serious side effects, especially for a child. But this knowledge did not stop him in the slightest. On the contrary, something cruel and cynical flashed in his gaze as he tossed the pills on the counter, as if defying all the rules and consequences. Maya said quietly, "Mom said this medicine is strong. She asked you to explain how to take it." But instead of explaining, he only waved her away as if he hadn't heard her and said with irritation, "Drink as you like. It's not my concern. If people like you can understand instructions at all, you'll figure it out for yourself. No advice about dosage, no warning about possible side effects, nothing that would help the girl understand how to take the drug safely." He knew she didn't realize how dangerous the potent drug he had so indifferently placed in her hands was. He realized that such negligence could have led to tragedy, and perhaps it was this thought that gave him a sense of grim satisfaction. As Maya stood confused, the pharmacist glanced at his watch, making it clear that her presence was an unpleasant delay for him. His coldness was almost palpable, and his every gesture spoke of the contempt with which he regarded her concern. The girl sensed that her questions and requests meant nothing to him, and though she felt fear and uncertainty, she had no choice but to take the pills and leave. When she left the pharmacy, Maya held the box of medicine in her hands, feeling even more confused and alone than when she had come in. She stared at the package, trying to remember exactly what her mother had meant to say about the dosage, but the heavy conversation with the pharmacist had jumbled her thoughts and she couldn't concentrate. There was no instruction sheet inside the box. The pharmacist had taken it out on purpose, realizing that he was depriving the girl of important information, without which taking the medicine would be dangerous. Maya, not understanding how to take the drug properly, decided to follow her own hunches, believing that one pill a day would be enough. She could not even imagine that one single mistake could lead to catastrophic consequences. Already in the evening, after taking the first dose, the girl felt a strange malaise, dizziness, nausea, and stomach pain. Every hour her condition worsened, but she tried to bear it, afraid to disturb her mother, who had already fallen asleep, unaware of what her daughter was going through. Late in the afternoon, Maya began to feel something strange and frightening happening to her body. At first, she felt a slight dizziness, which she wrote off as fatigue after a long day. But soon the dizziness began to intensify. Her fingers began to shake involuntarily, and dark spots began to flicker before her eyes. She tried to get up and walk to the kitchen to get a drink of water, but as soon as she did, she felt a violent attack of nausea, and the room swirled before her eyes as if in a mad, uncontrollable whirlwind. Maya staggered back and leaned against the wall, but her strength was diminishing by the minute. Her body didn't obey her, and soon she slid down the wall, breathing heavily. Trying not to wake her mother, she covered her mouth with the palm of her hand, suppressing a weak moan from the pain that seemed to spill over her whole body, burning her from the inside. She couldn't understand what was happening to her, and tears welled up in fear and helplessness. After a while, Mayina's mother was awakened by a faint rustling and a soft, barely audible cry. Disturbed by the strange sounds, she went out into the hallway and found her daughter on the floor, pale, trembling, and barely able to speak. Shock overwhelmed her at the sight of Maya, who couldn't even lift her head and utter a word. Her eyes were dimmed, her lips were pale, and she was breathing hard, as if each breath was an incredible struggle. "Maya, Maya, what's wrong?" The mother rushed to her daughter in a panic, trying to understand what could have caused such a sudden deterioration in her condition. Maya, gathering her last strength, could only whisper that she had taken the pill they had given her at the pharmacy. The confession struck her mother like a thunderclap, and panic gripped her. She picked the girl up, feeling her skin grow cold and her body weakened and lifeless, as if the life was slowly slipping away from Maya. Everything that happened next seemed to take place in a nightmare. The mother was desperately trying to call the ambulance, screaming into the phone that her daughter was sick, that she had poisoned herself with medicine. As the ambulance traveled, Maya gasped for air, her lips turning blue and her gaze becoming increasingly detached and lifeless. The mother, gripped by fear, pleaded for help, but all she could do was hold her daughter's trembling, weak body in her arms, realizing that every minute could be crucial. When the ambulance arrived at the house, Maya could barely react to her surroundings. The paramedics, seeing her condition, immediately realized that the situation was critical and began administering drugs to try to stabilize her vital signs. Maina's mother, confused and distraught with fear, could barely stand on her feet, grabbing her daughter's hand as she was loaded onto a stretcher. Questions swirled in her head, but the main one was, how could this have happened? Why had a routine visit to the pharmacy turned into a fight for her child's life? Upon arrival at the hospital, the doctors immediately started intensive care. Maya was semi-conscious, her body lying listlessly on a cold hospital bed, covered with IVs and hooked up to monitors. The doctors silently exchanged worried glances as they saw how quickly her vitals were deteriorating, and her mother could sense this desperation in their silent fussing. They didn't have full information about what had happened. They only knew one thing. The girl had been seriously poisoned, and every moment could be crucial for her. The mother, left behind the glass door of the intensive care unit, looked helplessly at her daughter, trying to find some support in the eyes of the doctors, but she only encountered cold looks full of doubt and fatigue. She saw how doctors, one after another, tried to stabilize her girl, administering powerful drugs, desperately fighting the progressive poisoning that was slowly but surely destroying her child's body. Every minute was torture for her. Her soul was torn with terror, and she couldn't take her eyes off Maya, pale and lifeless. Her memory replayed the moments of their happy life, her every laugh, her every look, and now the thought that it could all end was like a knife cutting into her heart. The family that arrived at the hospital was shocked at the sudden blow of fate. Everyone tried to comfort the mother, but even the warmest words sounded empty and helpless in the face of the nightmare in which the girl found herself. Hours passed, but it seemed like an eternity. The doctor finally left the room with a tired face and cautiously approached the mother. His words were careful but merciless. Maya's condition remained critical, and despite their best efforts, the prognosis was uncertain. The medication had taken a huge toll on her body, and no one could say whether her body would be able to withstand such a strain. Her mother felt her heart shattering into tiny shards. The waiting tormented her, like a growing pain that could not be relieved. She thought of the pharmacist, of his cruel words, and of the fact that it was his indifference and hatred that had brought her daughter to the brink of life and death. All she could do was pray, sitting under the door of the intensive care unit where the doctors continued their desperate fight for the life of her only child, clinging to every shred of hope. Maya's mother sat in the hospital corridor, surrounded by fear and pain, but behind that pain, something more was slowly emerging. Her anger began to flare inside her, cold and unshakable, like icy steel. She replayed over and over in her mind her daughter's last words about the way the pharmacist had treated her, the contempt with which he had looked at her, and how he had refused to explain how to take the drug. In that moment, she realized that what had happened was not a simple mistake. It was intentional. The pharmacist had chosen to humiliate her daughter by putting her life at risk. She remembered Maya telling her that the man hadn't just been cold, there was a challenge in his eyes, as if he wanted to punish her for daring to enter his pharmacy. This wasn't an accidental rule breaking, not a simple misunderstanding. It was a deliberate attack based on prejudice and hatred, on the fact that he didn't see her daughter as an equal. She was horrified at the thought that such a man worked with people, that he could do the same to someone else, that his cruelty and hatred were hidden behind a profession that was supposed to heal and help. When the doctor reported that Maya's condition remained critical, her mother stood up, and there was no more despair in her eyes. There was only anger and determination. She realized she wasn't going to wait any longer. Her daughter needed not only medical care, but justice. She couldn't let this pharmacist continue to work as if nothing had happened. She could not tolerate that the man whose actions had led to such horror remained at large, unpunished for his deliberate, cruel actions. She went to the hospital phone to call the police, and then the local authorities who control pharmacy licenses and regulate pharmacies. She couldn't speak calmly. Her voice shook with rage, but every word was as hard as a rock. She demanded that everyone know what had happened so that no family would ever experience such horror again. Her daughter could have died, and she knew it wasn't an accident. This man had robbed her child of her safety and jeopardized her life just because he didn't see her as a human being. When her family learned of her determination and heard about Maya's experience at the pharmacy, they supported her just as strongly. They saw that this was not just a fight for their daughter, but for every child's right to be safe, to be accepted without regard to skin color. In that moment, they became one, determined to go all the way until this pharmacist was held accountable, until the truth of his actions came out. Her anger had become a weapon, and she intended to use it to protect her family and anyone else who might have suffered the same cruelty. The story of Maya and her mother began to spread like wildfire. At first, it was just word of mouth among acquaintances, family, and friends who were shocked by what they had heard, but soon there was someone in town who helped spread the story further. The next day, the local newspaper published an article about the tragic incident, describing how a pharmacist, acting with bias and outright neglect, had jeopardized a black girl's life by selling her a powerful drug without a prescription and refusing to explain how to take it. The article sparked a wave of outrage, and within days, the story reached major news outlets and television stations. The media picked up the story, and journalists began covering every new fact related to the case. They described how the girl's mother fought desperately for justice, how she demanded that the pharmacist be held accountable for his cruelty and neglect. The news reports described her courage and determination to protect her daughter, to seek justice, and to end the racist prejudice that could have jeopardized not only Maya, but other children and families. With each new news report, more and more people joined in supporting the family. On social media, discussions began, with people expressing their outrage and disgust at the pharmacist's actions. Thousands of people left supportive comments condemning racism and demanding justice for Maya. There were peaceful protests in the city outside the pharmacy where the incident happened. People held placards with slogans against racism and inequality, demanding that those responsible be punished. The pharmacy, once a quiet place, has become a symbol of injustice, where human life is on the brink because of cruelty and hatred. The wave of public outcry was so strong that the local authorities were forced to react. An official investigation into the incident was launched, which revealed that the pharmacist had repeatedly violated ethical and professional standards. His colleagues, patients, and even some acquaintances began to recall instances of his aggressive, demeaning behavior, especially toward Black customers and people of other ethnicities. These testimonies only increased public anger, exposing a problem that had remained in the shadows for years. Television began showing interviews with other people who had experienced humiliation and unfair treatment at the hands of this pharmacist. They told their stories, reinforcing and confirming suspicions that his behavior was not an accident or an isolated episode, but a systematic problem that went deeper than just the incident with Maya. Support for Maya's family became so widespread that human rights organizations began to join in, offering legal assistance and issuing official statements against racist attitudes in healthcare. Maya's story became a symbol of the fight against prejudice and racism, reminding that no one should be threatened or humiliated because of their skin color or ethnicity. Gradually, the story spread beyond the city and reached the national level, becoming a topic of public discussion. People across the country condemned the pharmacist's behavior and expressed solidarity with Maya's family, demanding reforms in the oversight of healthcare facilities and greater accountability for bias in service and healthcare. After Maya's story received a wide public response, the attention to the pharmacy where the incident occurred became unrelenting. People demanded answers, and now the pharmacy management was forced to respond publicly. However, their first statements turned out to be more than evasive and caused even greater public outrage. Representatives of the pharmacy issued a statement in which they attempted to portray the incident as a misunderstanding or an isolated incident. They claimed that the pharmacist had no intention of harming the girl and that the misunderstanding was probably due to an allegedly difficult day and overload. They avoided mentioning any racial prejudice, not recognizing the racist underpinnings of the employee's actions, and tried to portray his behavior as the result of stress and fatigue. However, such explanations only fueled the fire. Many people, seeing the pharmacy's apparent unwillingness to take responsibility for what happened, began to express their discontent even louder. Parents and community activists said that attempts to put the situation down to fatigue or misunderstanding are a mockery of Maya's family and all those who support justice. People began to point out that the pharmacy management was not at all interested in investigating the bias and did not even try to suspend the pharmacist, despite serious allegations of violations of professional ethics and customer safety. The pharmacist, though the center of public attention, never once expressed public regret for what had happened. On the contrary, in rare comments leaked to the media, he claimed that everything was done according to the rules and that the girl herself misunderstood how to take the medicine. His equanimity and reluctance to admit guilt only reinforced suspicions that he was not only aware of his actions, but that he still saw nothing wrong with them. Some media tried to interview him, but he limited himself to excuses, avoiding questions about motives and bias, blaming the tense situation and false accusations. These statements caused a flurry of criticism against the pharmacy, and calls for a boycott began on social media. People demanded that the pharmacist be suspended and held accountable, and demanded an internal investigation and disclosure of all the details of the incident. Some local politicians and human rights activists also intervened, demanding answers from the pharmacy and pushing for a more thorough investigation into its internal policies to see if the management supported such actions. But despite the mounting pressure, the pharmacy management continued to stubbornly stick to the line of defense, stating that the pharmacist was acting within his competence. This statement, in fact, only served to reinforce the public perception that management did not see a problem with discriminatory treatment of customers. Instead of acknowledging the need for change, they tried to hide the facts, justify negligence, and minimize the consequences, hoping that the public outcry would gradually subside. However, support for Maya's family continued to grow. Activists demanded not only that the pharmacist be fired, but also that the entire system of control over pharmacies be reformed so that such cases would not be repeated. Public outrage reached such proportions that the pharmacy began to lose customers, and the pharmacy received daily complaints and demands to bring the perpetrators to justice. In the end, the pharmacy found itself in an extremely uncomfortable position. Under public pressure and with the threat of legal action, they were forced to suspend the pharmacist's activities. But even this action was done reluctantly and late, which only emphasized their indifference to the needs of the victims. Maya's mother, despite the pain and shock of the incident, was determined to get justice for her daughter. Supported by the public and human rights organizations, she launched a legal fight against the pharmacist and the pharmacy. Her anger turned to hard will. She could no longer allow her child and other families to be subjected to such injustice and neglect. She hired an attorney who specialized in medical malpractice and discrimination cases, and they began gathering all the evidence that could shed light on the pharmacist's criminal negligence and bias. The first step was to file a formal complaint with the state authorities controlling the activities of pharmacies. The complaint included not only a detailed description of the incident, but also medical reports confirming that Maya had been seriously poisoned. The documents clearly indicated that the drug, sold without a prescription and without proper counseling, had endangered her life. In addition, the attorney presented testimonies and testimony from others who had encountered the same pharmacist and his demeaning attitude. Many shared stories where he showed clear bias and disregard, especially for customers of a different race or background. It soon became clear that the case could go to court. However, the road to trial was more difficult than Maya's mother had imagined. The pharmacy and the pharmacist tried to defend themselves by hiring expensive lawyers and refuting the charges, emphasizing that the pharmacist had acted within the scope of his competence and that he allegedly had no intent to cause harm. Their defense was built on the idea that the incident was just a mistake, and they tried to argue that Maya's mother and her activist support exaggerated the situation. The pharmacy's lawyers took every opportunity to delay the case, obstructing every step of the proceedings. They filed numerous motions, demanded repeated medical examinations, hoping to complicate the process and undermine the family's resolve. There were moments when Maya's mother felt that her fight could have ended in nothing, that a system built to protect people could have protected the perpetrators. But seeing the support of the public and human rights defenders, she gathered her strength and did not back down. Activists and the media continued to follow the case, and each new stage of the legal battle was covered in the news. This put considerable pressure on the pharmacies, which began to lose reputation and customers. Influenced by public opinion and thanks to the family's perseverance, the case became not just a fight for justice for Maya, but a symbol of the struggle against systemic discrimination and inequality. After months of hard fighting and legal confrontation, the case finally went to trial. Maya's mother, her lawyer, and numerous witnesses who testified against the pharmacist provided compelling evidence that the incident was the result of prejudice, which was not an accident, but an act of neglect and outright hatred. The trial ended, and Maya's family was finally able to breathe a sigh of relief. The pharmacist was found guilty, and the pharmacy received severe sanctions and fines for gross violations of professional ethics and safety standards. This decision was the first step towards justice. But for the family, especially for Maya, the consequences of what had happened were permanent. After months of treatment and rehabilitation, Maya's health gradually began to recover, but her body was still suffering from the effects of the poisoning. Every visit to the doctor reminded the family of that terrible night and the pain they had gone through. However, the girl's morale grew stronger every day as Maya grew to realize that her resilience had helped not only her family, but also many others who had followed her story. She became a symbol of fighting injustice and bias, inspiring others not to be afraid to speak up. For her mother, the experience was both tragic and transformative. Her determination to pursue justice despite hardship showed how important fortitude is in fighting for the truth. She has continued to share her story by speaking at community events, supporting other families, and speaking about the importance of equality and respect for everyone. Together with activists and human rights organizations, she has spearheaded campaigns to promote accountability in healthcare and protect the rights of patients, especially children and people facing prejudice. Maya's story left its mark not only on people's hearts, but also on society itself. Lawmakers began discussing measures to tighten control over pharmacies and increase the accountability of healthcare providers. Many facilities revised their internal policies, introducing training and anti-discrimination programs to make every customer feel safe, regardless of their background or skin color. Maya's family taught the community that resilience in the face of injustice can lead to change. This case reminded everyone that every voice matters, that injustice cannot be ignored, and that the fight for equality is a long but necessary road to a better future. Maya's family hoped that this story would be a reminder to all of us. Change is possible if we are not afraid to stand up to evil and follow through for truth and justice. Friends, please share your opinion about this story in the comments. Have you or your loved ones experienced something similar, faced injustice or bias? Your stories and thoughts are very important to us. They help us not only to highlight the issue, but also to support each other. We appreciate each and every one of you and thank you for your engagement and support. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give us a like to keep up to date with new stories. We wish you a good day, and may there be more goodness and justice around you.